Welcome, bent riders around the world. My name is Gary Solomon, and you're watching the Laidback Bike Report. Guys, it is awful nice to have you with us today. We have an amazing show lined up for you. Let me tell you a little bit about what we got coming up. In today's webcast, well, Brian's under the weather, so we're not going to have a news report today. But we're going to go right into our special lead guest, which will be Maria Leijerstam, the polar trike adventurer from Wales. We've got Chris Parker, the co-CEO of ICE Trikes in Cornwall, England. Steve Wood is with us from San Antonio Bike Tours. Peter Stull, we think Peter will be with us here today. The Bent Museum update is what he's going to be talking about. He's got some new stuff. Denny's going to be on with us and deliver the sports. We'll have a viewer submission and some interesting announcements for you to talk about. So, in the meantime, let me introduce the crew that we do have with us today. Lars is also not with us, so we have a little bit of a more limited crew. We have Trey Burgoyne in Raymond, Mississippi, our media wrangler. Hello, Trey.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here.
And taking over the directorial duties from Lars, we have Tim Kane in Des Moines, Iowa. Hiya, Tim.
Oh, wrong camera.
That's why he's our director, ladies and gentlemen. All right, over in Sayre, Pennsylvania, it's Denny Voorhees, our sports director. Hey, Denny.
Hey, Gary. Nice to see everybody today.
And hopefully, yeah, Peter will be with us later. In fact, maybe somebody could send Peter a Facebook message with the link. Denny, we can maybe see if you do that while we're going. Okay. He might not have been able to get to that. So, all right, guys, let me talk to you a little bit about a couple of boilerplate issues. First of all, we are hopefully live on both Facebook and YouTube right now, and both of those platforms will provide a live chat for you to participate in, and we sure hope that you will. It makes these shows a lot more interactive and fun when you are a part of it. So join the live chat, make comments, ask questions of our guests or our panelists. And it'll be great to have you on the show as well as all of our guests. So we hope that you will like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you look down in the lower right-hand corner there, you'll see a little logo, a Laidback logo. You can click on that and subscribe. And also in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a little white eye, which stands for information. You can click that, go to our website, and find out a lot more about the Laidback Bike Report if you go there. All right, let me tell you a little bit about the sponsors of our webcast today. First of all, TerraCycle, makers of exquisite recumbent parts and accessories for your bent, and trailside.bike, a fine recumbent bike shop on the Withlacoochee Trail in Florida, and Cruise Bike, designed for the cyclist who wants to ride farther, climb faster, and adventure more. All cruise bikes and frame sets ship free in the USA. All right, guys, let's just jump right on in. Our first segment is featuring a wonderful young lady who is an adventurer and has traveled to the South Pole. And she did so on a very specially designed ICE trike. And ICE is with us today, as I mentioned, in the person of Chris Parker, and they have sponsored this segment. So ICE Trikes, let's put that slide up. I worked so hard on it. Can we get that up there, Tim? Yeah. ICE Trikes, producing recumbent trikes in Falmouth, England since 1999. Their hard-earned experience, coupled with the sheer pleasure of developing their unique recumbents, drives them on to continually refine their trike designs and hone the comfort and performance of each machine. Very good. All right. Let me give Maria a bit of an introduction. If you could come back to me, Tim, please. All right. All right, if you're anything like me, you require a little extra encouragement to get out and ride when the thermometer starts heading towards freezing. After meeting today's special guest, the cold weather whining will just have to stop. She's a British polar adventurer who became the first person to cycle to the South Pole from Antarctica's edge. She also showed superior judgment in choosing Chris Parker and ICE Trikes to build her polar cycle. Bent riders, we are honored to have Maria Leijerstam today on the Laidback Bike Report. Hello, Maria.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. Thank you
Excellent.
so much, Maria, for popping on the show today. Really not popping on. You've been working with me for a couple of weeks, hard to make sure this goes well, and went a little bit extra today. We see the polar cycle right next to you, so we're going to talk all about that if we can. But before we get to all that, let me introduce somebody who worked with you in getting that whole thing together. It's Chris Parker. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Gary.
Thank you so much for joining us from Cornwall there and ICE Trikes World Headquarters.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's very, very great honor to be here.
Okay, the honor is ours. Okay, guys. Let's go back to Maria if we could, and let's start out. Let's get the first slide up if we can. Let's go there, and then we'll come back in the middle of all this and take a look at some of the kit that we have there. All right, so Maria, if you would, let's start at the beginning, or as far back to the beginning as we can go. This is a nice shot of you as a child, and tell us a little bit about what you're growing up and what you thought about adventuring in your childhood.
Well, my first question is, where did you get that slide from?
So I happen to have known your parents for many long years. No, that slide is in your documentary.
It sure is. Yeah, no, that was me sitting up in a tree just outside our old farmhouse. I actually grew up in the Welsh valleys and spent a lot of time outside. If anyone's read my book, you'll see that my best friends until about the age of 7 or 8 were actually animals. So I did definitely have a bit of a sheltered upbringing, but that also meant that there was no television, there was nothing like that. It was always outdoors, climbing trees, exploring. It was definitely my blood from a very early age.
All right, and let's go to the next slide. And so, Maria, you just tell Trey to go to the next slide when you're ready to proceed, and we'll go from there. Okay.
Sure, if I can remember the slides. So yeah, this shot was actually taken at my parents' house when the whole idea of this cycle to the South Pole had already come about, and I was really, make some plans. Antarctica was quite a, it was an alien place to me. Obviously, I'd never been there before. There wasn't a lot of information available. The whole idea of cycling in Antarctica was very, very new. Nobody had ever tried to cycle to the South Pole before. So, the research and all of the planning started very, very much from scratch. And actually ran the table there. You can see my mother next to me, my father, my sister, her children. It was very much a family thing, this. I kept the whole idea very, very quiet. It was really my family, and then people would be brought into the idea on a need-to-know basis.
Maria, if I could just ask, so the initial idea was to get to the South Pole, but not necessarily to get there via cycling, right?
No, it was always to get there via cycling. I mean, I've had this love of Antarctica for as long as I can remember. And I've always wanted to go there. I've not really been sure what I should do. Should I ski there? Should I climb a mountain? What should I do? I would love to go. And I was actually in New Zealand in 2010, cycling the length of the country. So I cycled from the far north to the south of the country. And it was on this journey, actually, that I really started to appreciate cycling, I'm a multi-sport athlete, so I do something called adventure racing, but my strongest discipline has always been cycling. And I've got to admit now, I'm not a tricyclist. I never have been a tricyclist. I've always been, you know, either a mountain biker, or I also enjoy road biking. And in New Zealand, I was cycling, in fact, just a normal 2-wheel bike. But it was on this journey I found out that nobody had ever cycled to the South Pole. And it just got me thinking, and you know, I thought, well, nobody's done it. That sounds pretty exciting. You know, I wonder if it's possible, and I'd love to, you know, give it a go. And you know, at that stage, I was still thinking of cycling a bike, and it was only when I started to really begin to research and get some experience behind me that my thinking really started to change. And well, I'll go on a bit later.
Yeah,
on.
let's go ahead back to the next slide, because
yeah.
that's gonna, that'll be perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, this do you want me just to continue?
Yeah, continue where you were. We'll jump in again.
Yeah, just stop me whenever.
You're fine.
So this picture was taken in 2000, beginning of 2011. I went to Siberia, to Lake Baikal, which is on the central Siberian plateau. It's the longest, deepest freshwater lake in the world, and in the winter it's completely frozen over with black ice. And there was a race happening there, and I'd had the idea for about a year and a half. I'd been testing a few ideas. I'd already been to Norway to do some cycling, and there was this race that I found out about that involved cycling from the southern part of Lake Baikal to the northern part. In fact, it wasn't just cycling; it was a human-powered race. You could choose any means you wanted. So there'd be, you know, skiers, there'd be hikers, there were even some ice skaters. There was all sorts. There were some cyclists as well. And I thought, well, this is a perfect chance to not just test the bike, but to test the equipment, test my ability to be solo in the most extreme conditions, you know, harsh Siberian conditions that I could imagine. And it was a brilliant race, actually. It taught me absolutely everything that I needed to know, because I faced pretty much every challenge there. And it was, out of 30 people that started the race, only 8 people finished. It was a pretty tough one. There was cracking ice. There were people falling in the ice. There's people succumbing to hypothermia and frostbite. People to exhaustion as well. There was an awful lot, and I was learning about myself and how I can cope in these conditions.
And you were among the 8 people. In fact, you finished. Would you second?
I finished
or third?
second.
Yeah,
in the
amazing.
end. Yeah,
Okay.
I was beaten by a Russian cyclocross champion, so you know, I'll let him have that one.
Of course.
But you know, only because he's obviously pretty fit.
All right, let's go on to the next slide if we could. Is that...
Yeah, so the other thing that I really found out about on that race was that a 2-wheel bike has some fundamental problems when it comes to cycling on snow and ice, because when it was deep snow, those areas there was deep snow, I couldn't keep the stability. You know, it would go so slowly that I would have to put my foot down all of the time. And so, you know, that was causing a lot of break in the rhythm. Also, carrying the kit and the equipment that I had was very challenging on the polar cycle. You would have seen, on the bike, you would have seen there I had a lot on the handlebars, because I'd taken advice from people that ride fat bikes that you need to load at the front. But, you know, again, with the wind as well, blowing crosswind, one day I fell off the bike more than I can remember. I actually cracked my elbow and my hip, which was quite a painful experience and a very good learning point. Actually, I need to start looking at something different. And it was coming home from that I sat down with my father, my fiance at the time, and the company that was sponsoring me at the time, called Chorus Titanium Bikes. And we said, look, we need to rethink cycling. We need to start to think about this in a different way. And
all right. And right here, I think would be a good point. And because I'm going to ask you the next question, let's bring Chris into the conversation if we could. Let's do this. All right. That's good.
Cool.
And so Maria, so the question I'm going to ask, I hope will lead right into what you were about to say, is like, so how did you learn about Chris Parker and ICE Trikes? Let's get to that stage, and then we're going to bring Chris into the conversation.
Cool. So the company Chorus I was talking about before, they were very keen to start to develop something. So we were starting to look at, do we have skis as stabilizers? Do we have 3 wheels? Do we have 4 wheels? We were throwing all these ideas around. And we decided, right, 3 wheels it's going to be. We also looked at position, and we thought, what position, if I'm going to have a headwind, because in Antarctica, all the wind blows from the South Pole, I need to be in a position that is comfortable and aerodynamic, hence the recumbent. And we started to think of, how we were going to do this. After a few weeks, I got a phone call from Marcus, who runs that company. He said, look, I'd love to help you, but I just don't have the expertise in this sort of thing. We make 2-wheel bikes. But, he said, I think I know a man who can help. And in the meantime, he had been searching on the internet and found Inspired Cycle Engineering, and had already been on the phone to the marketing lady there, Lois, and organised a meeting. He said, what are you doing? In 2 days' time, I've managed to get us the meeting to go down. And so we just all piled in the car and drove far too fast all the way down to Cornwall, super excited. And we were just delighted to be met by both Chris and Neil, who is the other director of the company, and for them to actually open their door and open their arms and open their ideas and their thoughts and go, what a brilliant idea, we'd love to help you. Because, of course, I was worried. And also, particularly since it was kind of later in the day, I think we only had Chris, maybe you remember, was it 8, 9, 10 months or something to go?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't very long.
Late in the day.
Yeah.
Let's bring Chris in here. And so, Chris, could you pick the story up then from the initial conversation that you had, and what you thought, first of all, when you heard about this crazy idea, and take us up to when you actually got a chance to meet Maria.
What did I think? I was excited and bemused. I think, like, why would anybody try and cycle in the South Pole? I've watched plenty of documentaries, and to know that taking machinery to the South Pole is a fundamentally bad idea. Scott of the Antarctic tried it when he on his first expedition down there, and machinery doesn't do well. Human beings can just about survive, but machinery is an issue. And now somebody wanted to take an ICE Trike down there. Well, I know they're well built, but that is harsh terrain, and could we do it? I was intrigued to find out, and I wanted to meet the lady who thought we could. So that was
Chris, I know you're not a guy who tends to turn away from a good, interesting challenge. So I'm guessing it did intrigue you. And so you met Maria, then she showed up. And so tell us, guys, maybe back and forth a little. Tell us about that meeting and what came of it.
Well,
in fact, Chris, were you in the first meeting? I can't remember if you were in the first meeting. It was just
wasn't
Neil.
in the first. I wasn't in the first meeting. I don't know where I was or what I was doing.
Hiding from me,
or even why I wasn't. The feedback I got from the first meeting was that Maria was the real deal, and that we were going to help out. So that made me excited. We get a reasonable number of people contact us with interesting ideas, hoping for our help. And we've learned over the years that we have to look for people who can actually sort of put their money where their mouth is, if you like, and who are in with a reasonable shout of delivering, because an idea is one thing, but
they have to be credible enough for you to pursue it. Obviously, the case.
Sure.
All right, so let's go. Let's get to the part where you've decided. Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
I was just going to say, I think after the first meeting, Neil was obviously pretty, shocked at the suggestion, and I'd written essentially a user specification for what I was looking for, because again, I'd not been on an ICE Trike before. Neil was very kind to get a number of them out, and we went for a cycle around the car park there, and we had a little test. And then after that, I sat down and went, right, you're gonna have to build something with the fundamental model of what you've got, but there's certain things, because at that stage I'd started to plan the route, and I found out that actually I've got to cycle up a 3,000 meter mountain range. So there was this whole question on the gearing, some kind of amazing, you need to work some magic around the gearing.
Right. So basically when you got to Chris after that second meeting, so Chris knew that you needed a trike that could do what you wanted to do, and you weren't real specific yet. I'm just kind of interested in like what part you played, Maria, in the design in terms of coming up. What ideas did you have? And then Chris, where did you take those ideas to create the polar cycle? So Maria, I think maybe you've already, you need the gearing, obviously. You told them that. What other ideas did you supply to them in terms of what you needed?
Well, simply on this user spec, it basically said the gearing that's going to be able to climb approximately a 25% glacier, should they know how to build that. Obviously, the pedals. So I'm just going to bring my boots in here. I had already decided, tested an awful lot of boots. I decided to go with the Baffin Polar. I'm sure everyone in America knows these boots. Minus 100-degree boots. Now, these aren't the easiest things. As you can see, they're hugely wide. These aren't the easiest things just to put on a pedal. So we needed to have specific pedals, which I don't know if you can see here, but, this was very much kind of just manufactured on the go, based on the boot.
A heel sling type of thing, which I think most trikers are aware of, but that is quite an unusual one. So
it's of course I didn't want my heel slipping out of it.
Right.
I wanted to be able to get in and out. It's very, we've got bungees and wire and elastic. This is all totally the original stuff. I haven't touched this. It's kind of like hand sewed on stuff here, but do you know what? It worked. It did the trick. And then the other thing was all about the weight capability, because again, I'd looked at, well, will I be towing a pulk? Will that be just a normal pulk, or will it be on wheels, or will I try and put the weight on the polar cycle? I was concerned at the time about the wind, and I thought actually the more condensed I can have my kit so it's not being pulled behind me, the better. And so having a weight bearing capability of up to 50, 60, 70 kilograms was really, really, really important. And I remember so fondly, Chris, when you came to us and we cycled up a sand dune at Merthyr Mawr. It was fantastic. So I was cycling. Chris, who I think you said you weighed around 90 kg at the time, sat on the back of the polar cycle, and we cycled up a sand dune. I mean, that was just incredible. You can't do that on any other machine. I can guarantee it.
Let's go to Maria. If we could go to Chris here. I don't want to get too far ahead, because I'd really like to get Chris's input on more specifics of the design here, what he went with and how he decided to do those things. So, Chris, tell us. So now you got the story from Maria there, and you got your marching orders. How did you approach the design, and what did you eventually come up with?
Right. Well, it was largely the tried and tested method of trial and error. Build something, see how it goes, and then change it and see how that goes, and then change that and see how that goes. And several iterations in, we began to get somewhere towards climbing this climbing a 25% grade is tough. But of course, what Maria hasn't said yet is that she told us she had to climb this 25% grade without sweating. And there are reasons for that, like your sweat freezes inside your clothing and you die. So we didn't really want to kill her. That wasn't going to help. So we had to make it super easy to climb a 25% grade into a 50-mile-an-hour headwind on ice. So we didn't have a lot of the real conditions, but we have some fairly steep hills in the local woods that are fairly slippy. So that was our testing ground, really, and we just kept on building stuff until it worked. Yeah.
Tell us specifically about the gearing that you came up with, because I think people might be interested in what sort of gearing you would actually need to do that.
Well, that was a big question. You go to Shimano and say, so what's a good gearing pack for the South Pole? And they kind of look at you a bit blank. And then so it's like, well, what works? Is a hub gear best, or a derailleur is going to be best? And no manufacturer wanted to really say what was going to happen to their kit when we took it down to the South Pole, because nobody knows. You can't test it. Friends of mine said, well, go to an industrial freezer, you know, these big freezer factories, and try it in there. Well, that's great, but that's not even halfway cold enough. So so in the end, there was an awful lot of, frankly, guesswork and crossing of fingers. And we went with derailleurs in the end because everything is so frozen at the South Pole. When you get there, nothing is liquid, therefore nothing can stick. And because when we ride in the winter, water splashes onto our gearing and freezes, and that makes derailleurs a bad thing. But there is no water at the South Pole, so there was nothing to splash and thus nothing to stick. So derailleurs looked like they were going to be a good bet. They're also very easy to fix on the fly if they do break. There are many cheats that one can employ when some part of a derailleur system breaks. If we'd gone with a hub gear, we weren't sure about how seals were going to work. We weren't sure what was going to happen with the oil inside. We weren't sure about so many things. And with a hub gear, if it breaks, that's it. You're finished. So we went with derailleur gearing, but of course it had to be ridiculously low, which is why Maria's machine has a step-down gear in the middle to basically halve the gear. So her top speed flat out is about 12 miles an hour, and bottom easiest gear is very, very low and very slow. But at that point, the trike becomes kind of inexorable. There's kind of nothing can get in its way. And of course, the big fat tires. You know, Maria said, I need the biggest tires you can get because I need to float over the snow. So, okay. I mean, we'd seen surly bikes at bike shows for several years and always thought, wow, wouldn't a trike look great with those on? Ha, ha, ha. Who would ever buy one of those? Ha, ha, ha. And then Maria comes along and says, I need one of these. And we think, oh, this is interesting. So, yeah.
And how about the frame, Chris? Now, what were the design ideas about the frame? Because that's different than the frame you've made.
Well, the challenge to carry 60, 70, 80 kilos of kit on the back was like, okay, that's quite a lot. I'm glad I'm not going to be the back wheel. Thank you, Hope, for providing the rear hub for that one. That was brilliant, and that held up, which was good. But the frame itself, that was a custom build job by me, all out of steel. I wasn't going to trust anybody else's welding, frankly. We're taking Maria's life in our hands here. I mean, the South Pole does not take prisoners; it just kills people if they get it wrong. So, if she was riding an ICE Trike, she was going to ride one built by me. So I custom designed it and built it and put plenty of brass in the joints, so that sucker was not coming apart ever.
Very good. And the ultimate design concept, as you so interestingly put it before, was to build a trike that would not kill her, I guess. And that's great. All right.
That was my primary concern, really.
Yeah, of course it would be. All right, let's go back to, thank you, Chris. Let's go back to Maria. Let's pick the story up then from there. Let's talk. We have some slides, I think. Let's go to the slides. And I think the next set of slides we have to do with you testing. Let's go through here. We'll see these guys, and then we'll talk about the testing that you did on the trike. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I remember a number of just changes that we made where I was quite concerned about my feet being a little bit too high, because of course all the blood needs to stay in the feet as much as possible in those temperatures. So do you remember, Chris, one iteration was that we lowered this bar, curved this bar down to lower the feet. And then also I think we brought the rear wheel in closer underneath me at one stage as well. But this was, I believe, when I came down to you there in Falmouth, and I said to you, I need to know how this thing fits together. You know, I'm not a technical bike expert at all. And I remember you pulled absolutely every nut and bolt and bit off it. And then with me, you built it all together there whilst I was there, so I could learn, should something go wrong, what I would need to do. So please don't test me now, because that was about 7 years ago. But no, that was good. But I'm really delighted to say I actually didn't have to do anything with it. The only thing that happened was that at night, after I'd stopped at night, the air was leaking out of the tyres slightly. So there was something to do with the valves there, with the temperature, that it was letting air out. So I was having to pump up the tyres pretty much every day. But other than that, from a technical point of view, with the polar cycle, it was incredible, and it absolutely did the job, and it survived.
Yeah, let's go on to the next slide here. There we go.
Degrees. So you talked about the industrial freezer earlier. I did actually, my fiance had a friend that had a warehouse. He had a shipping company, or has a shipping company. And we rang him up and said, would you mind if I come and cycle in your freezer? Which, of course, again, got quite a few laughs. And I took the polar cycle down and cycled literally around the shelves. But because, of course, I had said the other design factor of it was, I just need to go south. I just need to go in a straight line. So I'm hoping, Chris, you've improved the turning circle of the actual commercial products, because this one does not have much of a turning circle at all. And so knocking over the burden of Matthew's freeze-dried foods and things like that was just sort of part of my journey around this warehouse. So
you slaughtered a number of baby carrots along the way.
Yeah. It was just hilarious to be cycling through all of this. But as Chris said, it was only about minus 19 degrees. So it gave me some feel of what it would be like. So I could test against some of the equipment. Train.
All right, we're having a little issue there with Maria's signal, I think. Chris, are you still with us?
Oh, there we go.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, this picture was actually taken at my parents' house. We had some pretty steep hills here, and we were just going up and down. We've got a hilarious bit of footage, actually, of me cycling through some bracken. 1 minute I was upright, and the next I was lying lying on my side, because I think we pushed it just that little bit too far. But it was great fun testing all of that. So this was at Tamworth Snow Dome. Again, I rang them up and I said, I'm going to South Pole. I need your snow dome to test a few other ideas, because again, at this stage, I had no idea whether it's possible to cycle in Antarctica, none whatsoever. And I thought, well, do I need to have a backup plan? And so here you can see the polar cycle. We're still with the rear tire, but having taken the front tires off and replaced them by these homemade, we literally, again, with my father, we made these attachments that would go on in replace of the front tires, which have skis. It was a kind of cool idea, but it didn't really work at all. I kind of slid down the slope sideways. There was something, it just needed a bit more of I think a technical expertise onto it to make it worthwhile. But you know, it was kind of worth a go. And I think we've got a slide later on, but I did still take some skis with me, but instead of taking the tires off, the tires would be strapped onto the skis. So I essentially turned the tire into skis. So again, it was just in case I couldn't cycle. So this picture here is me at Loughborough University. It was part of the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. They were monitoring my fitness. They were helping me with my training program. This is Dr. Carter standing next to me, putting me through an awful lot of pain. In this instance, I did sweat an awful lot. This is me doing the VO2 test. VO2 max test, which is basically you cycle until you fall off because you just collapse. But no, it was great. I went there about 6 months beforehand, and then I went there again about 3 weeks before I was due to go. And it really showed that I'd managed to improve my endurance, my cardiovascular fitness, and very importantly, my body's ability to burn fat before it burns the available carbohydrates that it has, that I put into my body. So, you know, my training was kind of scripted. I did an awful lot of training for the year really leading up to it. I was in serious training for 4 or 5 hours a day. I even got to the point where actually I felt I needed to train more. And so I set the polar cycle back up onto the turbo trainer, and I put my desk over the front of it so I could cycle in a very comfortable position, my recumbent position, and work and plan whether it's planning my logistics or trying to get my permits or things like that at the same time. So I was then sort of cycling 12 hours a day plus working.
All right, if we could hold off right here for a second. I've got a couple of questions, Maria, maybe for Chris as well. Let's see here we go. So Jesse Helston says, what kind of tubes did you use with this bike in the cold?
So the frame is all built from 4130 chromoly steel. Is that the best stuff to use? I don't know, but we've used it for many years. We knew it was super tough. We hear stories of metals cracking and breaking in the South Pole. So to offset that, I used a lot of it.
And I'm not sure, Chris, that she meant the tubes for the frame. Maybe, or he,
inner tube.
Maybe inner tubes. I'm not sure which.
Well, if it was inner tubes, it was standard fat bike inner tubes, because that's the only thing there is. And remember, there's no way of testing this stuff. I mean, Maria went out with everybody's best guess. I mean, the boots, proven. A lot of the clothing, proven. But the bike and stuff was just everybody's best guess, to be honest.
Right. And the only problem she actually talked about a little bit earlier, Maria, right, were the valves in those tubes. So maybe it was a problem. It's hard to know. But all right. And then, of course, everyone wants to know about chain lube. What did you use for lube?
Well, I didn't. In Siberia, I had actually just used oil on the chain. But in those conditions, in the cold conditions, it sort of starts just to clog and become quite laboursome. And so I actually just went with a totally clean chain with this one. And funnily enough, on one day up on the Polar Plateau, the chain starts to squeak, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't cycle the South Pole with this squeak. This is going to drive me mad. But luckily, in my little food pouch, I had some beef fat, and I thought, genius idea. And I took the beef fat out of my mouth and I rubbed it on the chain, and it stopped the squeak. It was brilliant. Best
There's a breakthrough.
Ever.
There's a breakthrough right there. Yeah. All right, while we're on this little break here, I think that's Dan Evans, maybe, right? I understand that planning is the key and vital to an exploration like this, but how do you account and plan for every contingency or what if scenario, Maria?
Oh, really good question. I mean, you can never account for absolutely everything, because I was going into the complete unknown. I knew that I was well trained, I was fit, I was strong, I knew my own body. I had done a lot of expeditions in the past. I knew how I would cope. So I went out to Iceland and I did like crevasse training. I went to Norway. I did plenty of, snow holing and sleeping in snow and cooking in snow. Obviously, I was in Siberia on the lake there in the harshest conditions I could find. So, in terms of eventualities, I went out and I searched for as many as I possibly could. But again, with Antarctica, it was very much an unknown. I was searching the internet, I always say the whole expedition started with Google, because it kind of did. I Googled about cycling in Antarctica and not much came up. I did contact some of the research stations, so particularly the McMurdo station, which is based down on the Ross Ice shelf, to try and glean a bit more information from them with regards to the conditions, the mountain that I was going to climb, and all of that. And they could give me some information, but until you're actually physically there, you just don't know. So I'm going to talk about a bit more of my kit a bit later on, but when some of the other pictures come
let's go ahead. I've got a couple of other questions. I think we'll wait until you get till you get to Antarctica, and we'll bring those up. So let's go back to the slides if we could, Tim. And this is you're going over all that kit. Let's go from there, Maria.
Packing, awful lot of packing. So that's Wayne, who's now my husband, I'm pleased to say. He stayed with me after all of this, which is good news. All my kit. I mean, I don't want to take too much because I have to carry it all. But then I didn't know whether it would take me 10 days, 20 days or 30 days. So in terms of food and rations like that and fuel, I had to make sure I had enough. The one thing I kind of skimped on was any form of hygiene stuff, because I figured it's the most sterile place in the whole world. Therefore, not much is going to go, there's not going to be too many, diseases or things like that I need to worry about like that. And so I think I ended up taking like 2 pairs of knickers for a month. That sounds disgusting, doesn't it? But I turned them inside out a couple of times and it worked an absolute treat. I kind of just had the clothes that I had. And I didn't really take much spares. So most of the weight was certainly the fuel, and the food was most of the weight, and then some of my other kit.
All right, let's
which I'll
go
show
on to
you
that
later.
next slide. I think we're going to start heading.
Yeah. So this shot was actually taken in South Africa in Cape Town, because I flew into Antarctica from Cape Town. So those white things you can see on the front there, that used to be a snowboard, funnily enough, that Rob from Tamworth Snowdome gave me after my trip there. I sawed it in half, I shaped them, and I made little skis that basically underneath the tire, the front tires, I would strap them on. So I didn't know whether that was going to be useful or work, but I thought, you know what, I want to take them just in case. Skis is the only way down there. And with that, I then kept my good steering. So it was the way of overcoming that. But this is me there packing and unpacking and repacking and trying things. The amount of times that I packed and unpacked and repacked, and it's just, I can't count. It just went on and on and on. And, I became, I suppose, a bit OCD on the whole situation. I had to know where everything was. And there was a specific way, and I knew in those extreme conditions, when I pack, it has to be done perfectly the first time and as quickly as possible, because, Antarctica doesn't wait for anybody. So this is a photo taken from the rear of the polar cycle. I've got my shovel out, which I've brought here as well to show you, which was my lovely shovel, which I've used on many of my expeditions. You might say, why? Well, there's two reasons I have a shovel. First of all, for at night when I'm digging my tent in, I need to be able to break up the snow and the ice for that. And secondly, for going to the toilet in Antarctica, you have to dig down everything. Whatever you do, you have to bury it.
All right, now here we go, because I told you, Maria, I was going to ask you. My wife wanted to know. I'm sure people are curious. So what is the process if you have to do your bodily functions and it's cold out there? What do you do?
So there's kind of a 10-second rule. You have 10 seconds to do what you need to do. If you're not ready, tough luck, you've got to pull them up, because you're going to get a frozen bottom otherwise. You can't really go and hide behind anything. Not that I would need to, because obviously I was cycling there on my own. But you dig a hole and you pull it down and you go, and then when you're ready, you pull it up and you cover it over. And that was really the need of the shovel. But within 100 kilometers of the South Pole, there's a rule that you actually have to carry everything out. So everything needs to be carried out. So for the first part of the expedition, everything I could bury everything, but then later on, the last really 2 days, it was about carrying it out.
Wow.
So there we go. Nice.
Very good. Thank you for that. All right, let's go back to the slides. And
so lots of kit. This is at the airport. We almost missed the flight, funnily enough, because I'd packed the polar cycle in one big box, and of course I hadn't adhered to the terms and conditions and rules and regulations of baggage allowance, which, total schoolgirl error, because I have travelled with a lot of kit to a lot of places, and I kind of knew it. But I think I was just nervous about breaking it up into lots of different boxes. And can you imagine if half the polar cycle arrived in Antarctica, not the other half? So we did in the end actually have to break the whole polar cycle down and put it in 4 different boxes. So and then hence almost missed the flight. So that was all.
This is the flight. That was the flight in South Africa.
Yeah, so that was, in fact, that was from Heathrow to Cape Town in South Africa.
All right.
So the logistics, do you want me just to explain the logistics?
Yes, this was a good point, since you have the map up there, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so it's a bit complicated, but there was a reason for this. I wasn't a sponsored expeditions. Most expeditions that go to the South Pole, they're corporately sponsored in some way. They have all the money they need. They can charter the flights they need to get them where they go. If you want to charter a flight in Antarctica, you need $250,000. That's kind of quite a lot of money, and I didn't have that. So I was actually lucky enough to be put in touch with Ed Parker, who was the person that was running the Walking with the Wounded expedition, which was the one with the injured servicemen and women and Prince Harry, who had been out there doing their expedition. And he had told me that they had a flight from Nova, which actually is just off the top of this map here of Antarctica. It's sort of, where it says South Pole, if you go due north, from the map, as you're looking at the map there, Nova is right on the coast there. It's a Russian air base. Their flight was coming from there to the South Pole to pick up Prince Harry. Now, and the rest of the team. That Walking with the Wounded expedition, they had used some trucks during their expedition, and I had been speaking to them. They're an Icelandic-based company called Arctic Trucks, and they had agreed to drive me down onto the Ross Ice Shelf to drop me off to start my expedition. So I actually did a couple of traverses of Antarctica during my expedition. So that is why I flew from Cape Town to Novo. I then took another flight, and I think you've got some cool pictures of the
let's go ahead with the
So this was me first touching down in Antarctica on the Aleutian Russian-owned aircraft. An amazing machine. You're sitting inside of that, and there you've got the baggage next to you, and I could see the polar cycle right at the back, and there was a portaloo strapped down in the middle of it, and there was oxygen masks hanging, and the inside of the fuselage, it's not kind of finished. It still looks like it needs to be finished. It was a real experience, and I thought, oh my gosh, are we going to get there? But the journey went very well. It was about 7 hours into Antarctica. We touched down, and this plane now was the plane that was chartered to go to the South Pole. And I managed to buy a seat on that for about £20,000. So it's not cheap. It is not cheap. But luckily on that plane, once the polar cycle was in Antarctica, I did not have to strip it down at all. They allowed me to fly with it literally right next to me, and I was not letting it go. I was sitting there with it going, this thing's going to get me to the South Pole. So this is my best friend.
Okay, next slide.
So I flew then to the South Pole, and this is a shot with Prince Harry. I was lucky enough to meet the prince. He was very nice. He definitely had his eye on the polar cycle, but I told him to keep his hands off because it's mine. But yeah, I think he was pretty keen to get home. His grandmother, the Queen, had said, you've got to be home for Christmas this year. I was going out, so I think I landed at the South Pole. I think it was around the 14th maybe of December, just before. So he was in a bit of a rush to get home, and I was in a rush to take the vehicles that he had recently been using to get me down to where I was going to start my expedition. So I made a huge error. In fact, I got to the South Pole, and I'd flown from sea level right into the South Pole. And funny, not many people know this, but the South Pole sits at almost 3,000 meters. It's kind of at the top of a mountain. And because of the position of the South Pole on the Earth, the effects of altitude there are much, much greater. It's probably more like 5,000 or 6,000 meters. And I know I don't do very well at altitude. I've climbed Mont Blanc, and I've climbed some of the other sort of 5,000-6,000 meter peaks, and I don't do well at all. And
next slide.
And I think I jumped onto the polar cycle, and I thought, hey, I'm gonna like cycle around it.
I'm sorry. There was a picture I thought we had of you on the next plane, and I know there's.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so maybe that needs to be a bit earlier. That was flying into the South Pole there.
Right, and then there was a picture, Maria, that we had. I don't think we have it, but you oxygen, and I think you talked about suffering. Go ahead with your story of.
So I was on that journey. In fact, we did actually have to land once to refuel because it was an 8-hour journey, and for the pilot to be able to fly Prince Harry home in one stretch, he needed to have his compulsory 12-hour stop. So we literally landed in the middle of nowhere. There was a tent with 2 men in it, and there was a few barrels of fuel. It was the most surreal, incredible experience. And I remember putting the tent up and jumping in it and going, oh my gosh, I feel a bit sick. And I really didn't feel very well, and I didn't eat for about 24 hours. So things were starting to not look too good. Once I got to the South Pole, I was then super excited. I'm at the South Pole, and there's princes over there, and I jumped on the polar cycle. Hey, look at me. And it really accentuated the effects of altitude sickness. And you must have been pretty
worried at that point. No way to start off your expedition.
Yeah, I got myself in quite a state, actually. And, I kind of panicked a bit. And there was, again, the Walking with the Wounded expedition. They had a medic with them, and Wayne, my fiance, and Emil, who was the owner of Arctic Trucks, who was going to drive us down. And this medic, they sort of took a look at me, and they sort of said, right, you've got to get her down to sea level. Go now. And literally I met Emil. They threw this onto the back of the truck, and we sped off because I needed to get down. I hadn't eaten for about 24 hours. I was really starting to get quite unwell.
So when you say get down to sea level, you were racing to get to the start of your ride anyways. This was sea level, yes? All right, let's go on to the next slide.
I was obviously very eager to get going. So this is us traveling now overland. So just to get, as you can see now, just to get to the start of my expedition was a mega expedition in itself. It involved a full traverse of the whole of Antarctica. We traveled for about, I think it was about 19 hours, and Emil drove nonstop because, you know, I was sitting in the passenger seat, kind of lying back, and he was trying to get me to eat. And I was like, no, I'm going to be sick. I can't eat. I feel weak. Everything hurt. By now, I hadn't really done any exercise for about a week, 10 days. So I was worried about that. Of course, I was also now getting to see Antarctica in the conditions that I was going to be cycling on for the very first time. I'm kind of blurry-eyed, one eye open, one eye closed, looking out, going, I can't do it. And he's there going, you can do it. I'm going to get you down there. You can do it. And he was brilliant. He kind of just drove nonstop for 19 hours. And if you think he'd already been on an expedition with the Prince for the last 3 weeks, he was already exhausted. He'd been in Antarctica for a long time. And so, you know, he did everything he could to get me down there. So, all
right, let's get you there. Let's go to the next slide. I think we're going to, there's a good
this is a cool picture. I like that picture.
Yeah, that's what you have next to you, but out on the plateau. All right, let's go next, please. Yeah, let's take a look here. Some of the things we've hit. All right, next one. All right, so let's kind of get you started. So you're at the start. This is actually maybe a little bit further on, but you're at the start. Let's take us from there, Maria.
So we drove down basically to sea level. I think actually it was about 100 meters above sea level because the ice is about 100 meters thick down there. So the Ross Ice Shelf is an ice shelf. It's not continent. There's no land underneath it. And I started my expedition on the edge of it. I wanted to make sure I was definitely off the continent. So actually I asked Emil to drive an extra couple of kilometers just to make sure that we were definitely off it. And then in the morning, I got onto the polar cycle very early before Emil had woken up, and I basically got going because this was the start of my dream that I'd been planning for 4 years. And I did not want to hang around anymore. I was absolutely ready to go. The great news is as soon as we hit sea level, I was totally back to normal, which is quite often what happens with altitude sickness. You know, you get the oxygen back into the blood and you feel normal again. I ate a massive breakfast. I was absolutely desperate to get going.
That must have been probably the largest relief that you had the whole
huge
thing.
And
now you felt like you could do it.
Yeah, I just cycled off before saying goodbye. I was so desperate to get going, and at that stage I was on the Ross Ice Shelf, so right in the distance I could just make out the mountains, the Transantarctic Mountains, which I was about to climb up.
Yeah, go back a slide or two there where we have her. Yeah, one more slide, I think. There we go.
So I think this is probably day 3 actually. I'm kind of in the mountains here, but yeah, it was such an incredible experience to see on my right hand side the Transantarctic Mountains starting to creep up on me. And then as I was getting into the mountain range, they were also starting to fall away on my left-hand side. It was such an amazing... And, you know, I actually, in Antarctica, if you go to the South Pole to do an expedition, you will generally go from Hercules Inlet, which is another side of Antarctica, and you ski to the South Pole or you trek to the South Pole. And it's basically all on the polar plateau. And I was so lucky to have the opportunity to see the Transantarctic Mountain Range because it is the most spectacular thing I've ever seen in my life. And this was where actually Antarctic exploration all began with Scott and Amazon back in 1911 and 1912, when they were out there racing to become the first to get to the South Pole. They climbed through the Transantarctic Mountain Range. So Scott used the Beardmore Glacier, and Amazon used the Axel Heinberg Glacier, and I had chosen another glacier called the Leverett Glacier, which is about 90 kilometers long from the sea level to the top of the mountain range. And like Chris was saying earlier, at points it got to about 25-degree gradient. So it wasn't just one long steep up. It was a sort of almost like a step. It was stepping up. So there was 25%, and then it would go down to maybe 10, 12, and then 25, and then 20, and then, it was kind of up and down and up and down. And so I'm just going to bring a bit of my kit in here because
let's go ahead and show that. Let me, while you're doing that, Maria, I want to tell everyone that so we're not going to be able to cover every step of the way that Maria rode the trike to the South Pole because it would take a long time. But she did, and we'll get to it at the end of the show. There are a couple of great ways to find out all about every step of the way. One is her book, and one is a wonderful documentary that was made. So I just want to just gloss over that right now to let you know that there are ways to find out a lot more about the story, which is a harrowing one. And I don't know we can share that part of it with you right now, but you need to read the book and look at the documentary. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Let's go back to Maria and let's see. Go ahead. Let's show some of the things that
quickly. So climbing through the mountain range. So I decided that if I lose this down a crevasse, I can't cycle to the South Pole. So my thought process went like this. It said, right, well, I need to invest in some kind of harness. Again, this is very makeshift, as you can see. We've got a bit of cord here and a bit of bungee, and this was attached to the steering column on the polar cycle and around my waist. But then I kind of thought, well, if it does fall down a crevasse and it's too heavy and starts to drag me down, I need to release myself from it. So I decided on a quick release one, which basically you just pull it and then it opens up. I'm very pleased to say I didn't have to use that, but I did have this reoccurring nightmare for about 6 months leading up to the expedition that I was going to fall down a crevasse and the polar cycle would disappear and I'd have to run down and start the whole climb again. So, that was I'm pleased I had it, and I'm very pleased that I didn't have to use it. So that was just a bit of the kit. And here's
this is the perfect picture I was going to ask you about. So not falling down a crevasse, but you did have a little issue. Oh, you were practicing, I guess, is what this was.
I'm pleased that I didn't have to use the harness to pull the polar cycle at all, because for me, one thing, and I think in the user spec as well that I wrote initially, it said something like, I want to cycle every meter of the way. If I'm not going to cycle and I'm going to pull it or tow it or carry it, it's not a cycling expedition. For me, I have to cycle the whole way, which I'm pleased to say that I did. But I did need to test all of this eventuality should I need to do it. And this was actually at Novo at the Russian air base that I was testing here. And limited. I was kind of slipping and sliding a bit as well. And, in some areas it didn't quite go as planned. But when it was attached to the steering column, it did actually track and follow me fairly well. So that was good.
All right. So now that it's going the way you wanted it to go and it's pointed in the direction you wanted to go, I have a question from my buddy, George Mills. How did you navigate? How did you know where you were going? How did you know to go to the South Pole?
Well, the sun was the number one factor. Of course, I had a GPS with me and I needed to generally head south. I was on a south bearing. There was one area that I had to divert from my south heading, and that was right at the top of the Leverett Glacier. There was a very big open crevasse area, which I couldn't actually go across. Well, I could have, but, I wasn't willing to risk it. So I did actually add about 30 kilometers onto the journey by going around it. So there was just one section there. The sun was obviously a very, very good, navigator for me. I got into a really good routine, actually, that it would come up over on my left and it would sort of go around me like this. And when it went over behind my shoulder, I knew it was my sort of 4 hours of sleep time, because it would get very cold as well when the sun was behind me. So, I rarely looked at a clock or anything like that. It's amazing how you become so in tune with nature when actually you have all the time to think about it and see it. So
very good. All right, let's go to the next slide. So you climbed up. Oh, there we go. You were through the mountains. I know it was harrowing, and you did make it over the mountain range, and now you're on the plateau. And what day is it, and how far did you have to go at this point?
So this was approaching the mountains, and then I had the big climb up through the glacier. So I got to the top of the glacier. I think it was day 4. It took me it took me 3 days in total to climb, and then I had my first night, night 4, up on the top. And this picture, I love this image. I call this Antarctica art because it's just incredible. This is up on the polar plateau. It's called sastrugi. It's when the wind blows the snow around. Not many people know this, but Antarctica is a desert. It doesn't actually snow very much there, but what it does do is blow a lot of snow around. And this is when snow freezes in situ, and it's so cold there, it will freeze. You can almost watch it. You know, the nature programs where they have them on fast forward and you sort of see a lake freezing over and things like that. You know, you can almost see that happen there because it's so cold. And it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. There's not a lot on the polar plateau, I've got to say. There's just snow and ice and a massive big sun and a blue sky when it's a nice day. When it's not a nice day, you just don't see anything. You don't even see the feet in front of you. So, yeah.
All right, so you're on the
beautiful
plateau now, and so you've finished the mountains, and that had to be a relief. Were your troubles over, Maria?
No, I mean, from climbing the mountain, I did start to suffer a lot with knee pain. I had a lot of problems. It was kind of just an overuse injury. You know, I'd done a lot of training. I've cycled a lot in the past, and I was starting to struggle. It did become a bit of a battle of managing the pain. Pain is temporary, just keep going, it'll be over. And it's incredible what resilience you can build up when you sort of tell yourself that pain is temporary, you can do it. So,
yeah, and you can see the pain on your face during your documentary. I mean,
yeah.
it really brought it home. And the book, I mean, you talk about it, everyone suffers with you, I think.
The pain was really excruciating. I remember thinking, that's bone rubbing bone right now. That is going to cause me long-term damage. And that was the thing that was worrying me, but I had to block it out because if I allowed that to affect my journey, it wasn't going to be good news. So I had to
right now,
let's
say that there was a problem and you couldn't continue the journey. Here's a question from Dan Evans again, like, what would you use for communication? And you did have to communicate, actually, didn't you, in the middle of this? Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a number of things. So I had just a radio, which gave me communication with the truck that had dropped me off at the start. So that was sort of the shorter range stuff. I had a sat phone. I carried my iPhone with me so I could do things like Twitter, which you can link through the sat phone. And so there's a rule in Antarctica that every 24 hours you have to call with a situation report, which basically says what your location is, how you're doing, and where you're expected to be in the next 24 hours. Should something happen and they don't hear from me then again in the next 24 hours, they would know where to come and search, essentially.
Okay. And you did contact them, Maria. Let's talk about this. So, and we can go through some of these slides as we talk about it. So your initial plan was to make this an unsupported expedition, but that had to change. Tell us about that as we look at these.
Yeah, I mean, I had every intention to do this completely unsupported because I think as a polar journey, you know, that's kind of the beauty of these things. And for the first 5 days, the first half of it, I was completely unsupported. But then I think it really was the knee pain and the, you know, not knowing how I was going to manage with the conditions up on the polar plateau. In fact, once I'd climbed up onto the polar plateau, I kind of thought, right, the hard bit is done. I've climbed through the Transantarctic mountain range, but then I was hit with a lot of soft, deep snow. And I remember so well, on the 5th night, I thought, you know, I'm just going to take the kit off the back of the polar cycle and just cycle and see what it's like. And it was like literally a weight had been lifted off the polar cycle, because all it needed was to reduce that weight by that sort of 54, I suppose it was a bit lighter at that stage, about 40 kilograms, because I'd eaten some of the food. And it just allowed me to have that float that I needed. And so I took the decision then to actually change from a completely unsupported expedition to a supported expedition. So I took a lot of the kit off and I lay it on the snow, and I used my radio to call Emil in the truck to say, I've taken the decision that actually I'm now going to become supported because the aim is to cycle to the South Pole. And I was worried with the knee, the sinking, the deep snow. Plus, we actually had a bit of a time limit on our hands. I was doing pretty well time-wise, but on that last day, on the first day on the polar plateau, I was quite behind schedule. And I was worried that if every day was going to be that, or even worse, I wouldn't make it in time for getting the trucks needed to be back for overwintering at a certain time. So I was kind of battling against time as well. There was a lot going on in my head. And so I decided to leave the kit. I rang him and I said, this is a location, I've left it. Can you pick it up? And I cycled off. And I've got to say, I cycled off in floods of tears because to me, it was a decision I kind of had to make. But it wasn't the decision that I wanted to make. Looking back now, I could have done it, keeping it, which makes it kind of a bit harder for me. But to cycle every metre of the way and get to the South Pole as the first person in the world to ever do so, I've got to keep that in my head because that is what I actually ultimately achieved. So,
of course, Maria, you didn't know the ultimate outcome of this expedition. So, with hindsight, of course, you can look back and say that. I think most people would say you made the right decision at the time, I think. So let me, at this point, you want to show you had a little bit more kit. I know you had some of your food to show. Is that?
Yeah, so I did.
What else do you have to show first? And then we'll ask some questions.
I carried freeze-dried food with me just because it doesn't weigh much at all. So this weighs about 110 grams only, and it gives me, 800 calories. That's quite a lot of calories in a very light pouch. This particular one was potato and salmon in dill. Doesn't sound very nice, and in fact nothing in Antarctica tastes particularly nice, but it's on a need to have basis. So freeze dried means that I needed to obviously melt snow and ice every night to make water, and I just had a little stove. I just used the little MFR stoves like this. And when you'll see pictures actually where you can see lots of yellow on the polar cycle, and I'd run out of space to put these in the bags, and so I strapped them underneath here. And so you'll be able to see in the documentary and some photos in the book, there's a lot of yellow. It's all of my fuel bottles strapped to the underneath of the polar cycle because actually it ended up being the best place to put them. I think I carried, I can't remember now, I think it was 6 of these that I carried for the whole journey. So, yeah. That
Maria,
was,
do I remember there was something you had in the book about snacks that you ate that you really enjoyed? What was that about?
I don't know about the really enjoyed bit. To start with, I really enjoyed. Towards the end, I really didn't enjoy. I just had a bum bag around my waist. And in there, I just had a combination of things that I knew that I kind of really liked, plus I needed. So I'm half Swedish, so I love salty licorice, for example. So I had some salty licorice in there. I had, chocolates, and I had nuts, and I had pretzels, and I had jelly beans. And then, like I said earlier, I also had, so my fiance is from Zimbabwe, and there they eat a lot of biltong. So we, in Cape Town, marched off to a local butcher's and got lots of biltong, and actually said, just give me loads of beef fat because I needed this. The fat was really good to be eating. So chopped all that up and just mixed it all around in this bum bag. And so during the day, that's pretty much what I lived on. I would just put my hand in there and pull something out and see what it was. So
now, you showed us your boots a little bit earlier, and we got a question from James Hart. I'd like to hear how she kept her feet warm. So I don't know if you saw the boots, but did that do the job?
Well, these have been very used, as you can see here. I made an error with the boots because I wore them obviously for the expedition, and when I started the expedition, it was about minus 15 degrees, which actually is quite a doable temperature. These are minus 100 degree boots, and I didn't realize it, but when I cycled up the Leverett Glacier, my feet had been sweating, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that at all, and it kind of caused me problems later on. And I think once I was on the polar plateau and I had the 50 mile an hour winds blowing, and I had the storms and the minus 40 degree temperature, plus with the feet in that sort of position in front of you, it wasn't very conducive to keeping the blood flowing there. And so I definitely struggled with my feet. And at night I would pull them out and, my socks would be wet, which would have in place frozen, in areas frozen. So I struggled a lot towards the end.
Tried to avoid for sure. How about Julie
absolutely.
Lovegrove, a countryman of yours, says must have been difficult to change gear with those big, thick gloves on. How was that? Is that a 10-second rule too, or how did you do that?
No, well, Chris had done the magic thing as well to make it very easy that you just push the lever forward and pull it back again. And I had a thin pair of gloves plus a second glove. And then I don't know if anybody has used these pogies, absolute lifesaver. So look how warm these are inside. So these actually sat on the handlebar. So you can, I don't know, can you see this one? Maybe you can't see this one. It would sit on the handlebar here. So it would go through this handlebar there. And then my hand would go into it. And I could change gear inside the pogie. So not once, in fact, my hands not once were cold. I was happy as anything with my layering system. I then had big mitts as well to put on that once I was off the polar cycle doing things, maybe when it was putting the tent up or trying to do, something else, I could put the mitts on. But yeah, I generally always had 3 layers, and these pogies were a lifesaver.
All right. Very good. All right. There's a few questions about specific numbers about the trip. I have a slide at the end. We're going to talk about all those if Maria doesn't, but we need to kind of get on with this here. So back to the slides if we could. And I think we're going to be, so we, before, why don't you bring us to the polar plateau and then your approach to the South Pole, which got you to this point. Tell us all about that, if you would.
I was probably about 15 kilometers or so from the South Pole when I first caught sight of it. And to start with, there was just sort of this almost like blinking in the back, in the far distance, where I wasn't quite sure, is that it or is it not? And soon it became apparent that it was.
Trey, can you back up 1 or 2? I'm not so sure we don't have a shot. Back up again. Yeah, so there's a few here. Okay. And is there one before that? Okay, we already did these. Go ahead back and go ahead.
In that final approach, whatever happened then, I had made it. I knew I had made it. I went through every single emotion the human body is capable of going through. I cried, I laughed, I did everything, everything imaginable. I couldn't believe I had cycled every single meter of the way. And when I finally reached sort of the South Pole Station area, I actually had to stop because once a week there is an inbound flight going to the South Pole, and I had timed my arrival at the same time as this aircraft, and so I couldn't cross the runway to get to the South Pole, and I had to sit and wait for about an hour and a half, which was an absolute killer. It was the worst thing in the
excruciating
whole world. It was like, it's there but it's not. And after that, I had 6 kilometers to go. And I just remember that it was almost like the pain was so horrifically bad across my entire body. I had now switched off, when the whole adrenaline kicks in, and it had switched off. And I remember at the South Pole, it was the terrain was really rutted because they had vehicles going around there. They have tractor trailers. They have all sorts of things. And the vibration of the knee going over these ruts was just horrific. And it kind of just went on. And I just thought, it's got to be here. And I couldn't see the pole because I had to go around the station. And then I could see it about 200 meters away. And, I cycled in. And the team that had been driving the trucks, they were there waiting for me. And some of the scientists from the South Pole Station had come out as well, who had been watching my tracker. I was carrying a tracker as well, a yellow brick tracker. And they came out to meet me. So it was the 17th of December, 2000. No, it wasn't. It was the 27th of December, 2013. I arrived at the South Pole after 10 days, 14 hours and 56 minutes of cycling. And I arrived there as the first person in the world, obviously, to cycle to South Pole. And I didn't know it at the time, but I'd also set the human-powered speed record for any coast to pole traverse. And a lot of that was down to the fact that I'm just pretty stubborn, and I was doing sort of 17-hour days. I kind of figured that if I sleep, if you snooze, you lose. That's very true. If I sleep, then too much. And, where there were areas where the conditions meant that I could have sat a day out. Actually, I chose to continue. And of course, not having any technical problems with the polar cycle as well really helped me get there. So I was.
Can you describe that triumphant moment though, when you actually? It just the best you can. You probably can't put it exactly into words, but how did it feel? Tell us.
Do you know, it was almost numb. I had for about 3 hours from when I saw the South Pole Station the first time out. There was about 3 hours between then and arriving at the pole. So I'd already gone through all the emotions in those 3 hours. And I remember when I got there, I sort of leant forward and I grabbed hold, still on the polar. I wasn't really able to get off the polar cycle, and I grabbed hold of the South Pole marker, and I just, I almost couldn't think any longer. And then Wayne, my fiance, who was there, and Emil, they kind of ran over to me and they literally had to lift me off. And it's incredible how the body then just shuts down. I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand, I couldn't speak. I was in quite a bad way, and they had to sort of carry me. And it was, it was a pretty big deal.
Yeah,
but I
so
just remember
you gave everything you had at that point, and nothing left. So
I remember just thinking, I just want to go to sleep now. But funnily enough, the guys from the research station, they had said, hey, come and have a tour around the South Pole Station, which, you're not at the South Pole every day. So I was like, okay. And so with Emil on one side, Wayne on the other, we kind of hobbled over.
You played tourist after
I went on a tour.
All right, that's wonderful. All right,
I got my jumper.
Oh, there it is. So that's from being there. That's awesome. All right, so the last slide here I have sums up some of the numbers, which you talked about some of them, but I wanted to go over this, and this is going to answer some of the folks who have questions also, and if you want to talk about these. So fun facts about Maria's adventure. So the total distance, 638 kilometers or 396 miles. Cycled 10, you mentioned this, 10 to 17 hours a day with no rest days for 10 straight days. People were asking about the temperature. So you can comment about this, because I think you had told us that this was not as cold as you might even have expected. 29 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Fahrenheit without the wind chill were the lowest temps. Was that representative of what you expected, or?
Well, I mean, I've not really been in those sorts of conditions, and the Antarctica cold is very different to any other cold on the planet. You go to Iceland or you go to Norway or you go to Siberia, it's a different cold because it is this desert climate. There's no precipitation in the air, and it's just this bone-chilling reminder that the human body should not be able to survive in those conditions. And so, I think with that wind chill, it was in the kind of minus 40s, because the wind can cause, can make a minus 29 very cold very quickly. And there was 2 days I remember in particular where it was quite a storm. I couldn't see anything really. It was blown straight into my face. And that was a pretty big deal. And it was that balance between, I've got to keep the body moving, because actually I'm carrying 37 degrees Celsius around with me wherever I go, and that is good human warmth, and I need to make sure that I keep that up. So
right, and that warmth comes at a cost as well, which is the next line. You lost 8.2% of your body weight, and you were taking in 4,000 calories per day.
Yeah, so had I been a man, that 8.2 would have probably been about knocking on the 20% door, I'd say, because the female body is an incredible thing. I'm not saying the male body isn't, but I think from personal experience, my body absolutely adapted to knowing how it should burn energy to propel me forward, and it was doing so in a way where it's not eating itself up too much.
Right, you were training to burn more fats as opposed to calories from carbohydrates and such.
Yeah, exactly. And even towards the end, so that 4,000 a day, certainly at the beginning I was getting that. Towards the end, because again the climb, the altitude gain, I lost my appetite. I remember the mushroom soup, which I absolutely detested towards the end, and forcing myself to eat it, and forcing myself to eat all of the snacks in my bag. I was having to make myself do it, and it wasn't. So I was probably down to about, I'd say, less than 2,000 calories towards the end. but I didn't need as much either. So.
All right. Well, let's finish this segment up with the two Guinness World Records that you got. So, you just happen to have it. Let me read this, and then you can show that. I can't. Nope. Okay, we'll go ahead and show it first. Yeah, let's do the double shot here so I can, and then I'm going to go to it. So the first person to cycle to the South Pole from the edge of Antarctica, and you also set, and you mentioned this, the world HPV record for this at 10 days, 14 hours, and 56 minutes. So, so go ahead.
I suppose it wasn't so much the HPV, it was more just human powered. So not necessarily with a vehicle. So it could have been a skier, it could have been a walker, it could have been a runner, it could have been, anything, as long as it's human powered. So no, I mean the Guinness Book of Records is for the first person to cycle to the South Pole, which I think is obviously the most important because it can never be beaten. I'm very, very proud of that. So this sits above my desk, and when I'm having down days, I do look at that, and it reminds me that it was a pretty good journey. But the speed record, it still stands. There's a number. So funnily enough, there's a certain Olympic cyclist called 6 times gold medalist called Chris Hoy, who has, I'm sure you've heard about, has been talking about trying to go out and beat my speed record. So it feels kind of cool I'm actually now a mum of 2. I'm kind of a full-time mother. To have a 6-time Olympian trying to beat my speed record cycling, where that is his main sport, is quite nice to have. So I'm still
you're in a pretty good position there. Let's go to the last. There's a couple of slides which kind of get to afterwards. So you continue to be an adventurer, Maria. You have done a number of other things. Tell us just real briefly, if you would, about what you do now in terms of adventure.
Sure. So my background is actually, I'm an adventure racer. So I race on the World Series circuit. There's 12 races a year around the world, all over the world. And these basically are run, bike, kayak adventure races that cover anything from maybe 400 to 1,000 kilometers. They're team events, teams of 4, mixed teams. So some male, some female, and they're non-stop. So we don't stop. So from a sleep deprivation point of view, this is really the ultimate in endurance sport, adventure racing, because you need to have the skill to do all of the different kind of sports. You need to have the fitness to be able to cover up to 1,000 kilometers, and most fundamentally, it's non-stop. So this last race, this shot was taken in the Norwegian fjords. This July just gone, I took part in a race there where we actually came 4th in the end. We covered just short of 700 kilometers. Took us 6 days, and we had just under 9 hours of sleep in those 6 days. We climbed twice the height of Everest during it, on foot, on bike, and we did all sorts of things. I think you've got some other shots as well of zip wires. At one stage we were hooked into this and sort of bombed down the mountain on a zip wire for 600 meters, which was absolutely incredible. And it's a sport that just makes me feel alive. I absolutely love it. You navigate your whole way as well. So, you need to have some strategy. You need to have skill in navigating. The multi-sport side to me is what I really love, because I love sport in general, and to be able to combine all the different sports. There was times that we were up on glaciers. We were crossing glaciers up on the high mountains. We were paddling in the fjords. We did some grade 4 rapids in rafts as well. There was pretty much everything thrown in. So.
Maria, this kind of brings me to a couple of last more general questions about you, what you do as a person and an adventurer. So. First thing, I've had other people that were ultra racers and do things that really take the body to the ultimate next level. Maria Parker comes to mind. She's an ultra racer, has raced across America and such, and I've had her on the show a few times. And she, I always want to know about the motivation and such. So she told me that she always looked like for the next telephone pole on the horizon to create like mini motivations for her to keep, I asked her, how do you keep going? And this is what she said. She find these little motivational things on the horizon. Well, let's say you're on the polar plateau as you were, and there's not any telephone poles or really any sort of features out there at all. How do you motivate yourself when you're in so much pain and you've got still a good while to go? What do you do? What tricks do you play?
Yeah, I mean, setting these minor goals was super important. If I was, whether it's day 4 or 5, and I still didn't know how far I had to go, to think about the South Pole at that stage was just too distant, was too far away. So, those incredible bits of sastrugi you saw earlier, I would kind of gaze at something way ahead. It might just be a little flashing of ice somewhere, and I'd focus on that, and I would cycle towards that. I counted the number of times that my feet would rotate, or that the tires would go round. I watched the logo on the inside of the tire, counting that going round. I found it hilarious because I'd already calculated there would be something like 650,000 revolutions of the wheel during the journey. And so I thought it'd be hilarious to count backwards, because if you try and count those big numbers backwards, it's really difficult. So that kind of kept me super entertained. And
okay, it's interesting. Yeah,
working out.
I was just going to say, it's interesting. That's really a very similar kind of thing. My last question, and then we're going to get to your book and such, has to do with fear, because I'm thinking ultra cyclists deal with the pain and the long journeys and many motivations, but maybe not with the kind of fear that you had to deal with. You actually risk your life on this expedition and others as well. How do you deal with the fear, and do you actually use it as a motivation?
Yeah, I mean, the fear is a really powerful thing, because it can cause you to make bad decisions, and controlling that fear in some way is sort of the ultimate. When it comes to pain, I think if you fear pain, it makes pain so much worse. So if you don't fear something, if you accept it and allow it to be. So yeah, with my knee, certainly, it was, don't fear, like I was saying earlier, don't fear that I'm going to cause long-term damage. Just allow it to hurt. It hurts. If I allow it to hurt and allow it to be, and know that it's not going to last forever, that I can sort of overcome that. Or, if I can see some crevasses or an avalanche falling down the mountain, okay, well, I can see it. I've acknowledged it's there. I could worry and panic about it and then do something wrong. But actually, if I just allow it to be, and it's very much about this whole being in the now and allowing yourself just to be. And I did a lot of mental training for this expedition. I knew I had to, so I did an awful lot of that. And one of the techniques I used was to draw an invisible circle around me and the polar cycle. Anything within that circle I can focus on, I have control of, I can manage, keep the focus near. Anything out of that circle I can't control, and therefore there's no point in fearing it. There's no point in worrying about it or making decisions based on it. It's more of a case of, okay, control what you can control. So there was lots of little techniques like that I used.
That sounds like something everyone could really maybe use in their daily life, at least to some extent. So, all right, Maria, we're going to, I think, leave it there. I want to, before we completely finish up, I want to talk about what came of your expedition that is out there. We know you spent a ton of money. You kind of mentioned a bit of it, and you continue to want to do other sorts of expeditions. So how do you support yourself? And the first thing is, you have a book out that I've read, and I think a bunch of our viewers have as well, which is a wonderful book. It's called Cycling to the South Pole, and it's available on Amazon. And so that's one thing. And then the next slide is the documentary that's out there. That's a little bit hard to find, and I'm going to put links for both of these things. It's a wonderful, I think, about 45-minute documentary that they made of your preparations and a trip to the South Pole. It's an emotional roller coaster. If, both the book and the documentary, I highly recommend it to everyone. So we hope that they will have a chance to do that. And tell us, Maria, is it important for people to support you in this way? Is this help to recoup some of the financial burdens that you've taken on with this?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I took on this expedition with a very big loan. I was very lucky to have, obviously, ICE support me with the polar cycle, and a lot of my kit and equipment I got for free from the companies. But in terms of the actual logistics, we're talking six-figure sum, was basically savings and loans. And so, yeah, I'm very reliant on people buying my book, which I happen to have here, buying my documentary. I also do a lot of public speaking. I speak at company corporate events. Here's just a shot of me speaking at a local a night of adventure. It's actually a charity event with about 500, an audience of about 500 people. So I do all sorts. I go to cycling clubs. I go.
You also have a TED Talk that's available online too, from early after your adventure to the South Pole, I believe, right?
Yeah, I remember that very well. I'd actually just had my first child, and it was a week later, and I was on a stage giving a TED Talk with a 1 week old. So yeah, that was quite a big deal, I think.
So speaking engagements are important too, and we're gonna link to that page as well. So
I mean, I certainly like the corporate talks because they're the ones that help to pay off the expedition. So
very good. All right. Well, Maria, I can't tell you what it's meant to me personally, and I know to our viewers to have you take the time to share the amazing story of your journey to the South Pole. Thank you so much for doing that. I enjoyed working with you in preparation for this, and I know you spent a lot of time doing that. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me on. It's been really, really nice.
A pleasure. And Chris, I'm sorry we haven't spoken to you. I had some more questions for you, but this segment has gone a little long. So thank you for taking the time and coming on and sharing your experience working with Maria on this. It's always good to see you, my pal.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Take care, guys. And you're welcome to stick
Bye.
if you want and watch the show if you like. And if not, we will catch you guys next time. So, all right.
Cheers.
Let's go ahead. We're going to put those guys backstage and go to the next segment of the show. We have a gentleman that I want to talk about right now. I often see posts on social media about bent riders wanting to explore faraway places, but not wanting the hassle of flying with their own bikes or trikes. From my research online, there are precious few options, I should say, that are available today. Well, I want to bring you today at least one great solution to this problem, and it's San Antonio Bike Tours. This trike enterprise is owned and operated by our next guest, who you see right there. It's Steve Wood. Hello, Steve.
Hey, Gary. How are you doing?
We're doing good. Thank you for being patient and sticking around to get to your segment. And I'm really excited to share what you do there in San Antonio with the folks. So let's, if we can, get right into it. And if you wouldn't mind, tell us about, first of all, before we get to your slides, about your background as far as recumbents go and bike or trike touring.
Sure. I first discovered recumbent trikes, like a lot of people, about 20 years ago. I'd been a bike rider for a long time, and it was just too darn uncomfortable. So I bought my first recumbent bike 20 years ago. And then I started doing some touring. And 19 years ago, I bought my first trike. I actually bought it in France and toured on it. And did several tours in Europe, and I had retired about 10 years ago, and started thinking about, what am I going to do? And we at the time hosted a lot of folks through couch surfing, and I would take my couch surfing guests for bike rides around San Antonio, and they said, you're not a bad tour guide. And I found out I could become certified as a guide here in the city. And 9 years ago, I started San Antonio Bike Tours.
Very good. I think that's a great spot to pop into the slides. And let's take a look at some of the things that you do on the tours. Can we? There we go. The San Antonio Bike Tours. There you go. And all right. Well, maybe first of all, we should, if you can, talk about how you lead these tours, what the process is, and what you use to lead them.
Sure. Well, we do 2, 4, and 6 hour guided tours of the city. And a couple of things that kind of differentiate us. Of course, we use Recumbent Trikes. And we have 2 Quest velomobiles that we use as our lead and chase vehicle. So I ride in the front leading the tour, and my partner Suzanne Teixeira rides. I have a Quest XL. She has a Quest XS. And so we ride as a group. And all of our guests have radios, so it's a narrated tour, very focused, and having the radios allows Suzanne to kind of keep heard on the people in the back.
Very good. Okay, let's go through the slides if we can, and you can just these are, I think, just representative of various tours, pictures that you sent me. And so if you want to just kind of talk through these, we'll go through them a little bit. If you want to stop on one, let us know.
Sure. This one is the first one. This is a pre-ride briefing. All tours start out with a fitting of the trikes. We do a briefing in the on the use of the trikes, because most of our riders have never ridden a trike before. And this particular shot was a local television station was doing a piece on us, but they get get equipped. That we provide them with a helmet, a water bottle, a pre-filled water bottle. It's their souvenir, and go through a fairly detailed operational and safety briefing before we actually start the tour and do a little riding. This one is just cruising along one of the streets of downtown. We have a very good bicycle infrastructure here in San Antonio with bike lanes on many of the streets. Some of the streets allow bikes to take a full lane, and also a lot of paths as well, and a lot of public art. Here we've got a great a mural down in an area called Southtown, just on the south edge of the central city. This is along the river. The San Antonio River is one of the major attractions of the city. Of course, the famous River Walk downtown. But this picture is taken in going down to one of the missions, and this particular piece is each bridge we go over has art, and those blocks, although they look just colored right now, that's luminous paint, so at night they glow.
Cool.
This is in one of our city parks, Brackenridge Park, the second oldest of the parks, and it's one of the fun places we like to ride because we're the 7th largest city in the United States, but here it really doesn't feel like it at all. This is along a stretch called the museum reach of the Riverwalk. Now, the Riverwalk's broken into several different sections. This particular section is one of the newest areas. It was finished about 10 years ago, and it connects the downtown to the Pearl Brewery Complex, which is the German heritage of San Antonio. There were a lot of brewers here, and one of our nicknames of the city was the Milwaukee of the South. And the Pearl Brewery dates to the 1880s, and it operated up until 1999. And here's one of the barges. Actually, it's one of the older barges. We just replaced these with electrically powered barges, also along the museum reach. And there's the Tower of the Americas, which was the centerpiece of Hemisphere, which was the World's Fair held here back in 1968. This is also in Hemisphere Park. We do different themed tours. So we have one tour that we call our Park and Garden Tour, where we cover 4 of the city parks, including Hemisphere. This is right outside the old Mexican, currently the Mexican Art Museum, but it was originally the Mexican Pavilion at Hemisphere.
Yeah, Steve, we have a question here from CJ Belgrave. Can you use your own trike on one of your tours?
Yes, you can. Matter of fact, last year we did the Recumbent Cycle Con, and about a week after the con was finished, we had a group of 6 trike riders who came down and they joined us for I believe they did a 6-hour tour with us. And we had a great time with them. They brought their own trikes. I think they'd ridden the Natchez Trace and then worked their way on over to San Antonio.
All right.
This is also in Brackenridge Park, another bit of public art. There's an amazing amount of art throughout the city, and it's not just it's not just murals here. This is a bronze sculpture. It looks like sections of tree trunk there in the center of the park. Some of the street art, we try to take a little focus on that. This was done as part of an annual arts festival called Luminaria. And
on a tandem there, I see, right?
Yeah, we have 7 solo trikes and 1 tandem, and our tandem is equipped with independent pedaling. We have occasionally had guests who, like we had a gentleman who's 92 years old, and he had last been in San Antonio doing his basic training at the end of World War II, and he rode on the back of the tandem. His son-in-law rode in the front. And he would look at Suzanne and put his finger to his lips and say, "Don't tell him I'm not pedaling."
All right, let's go to the next one.
Just another little street scene. I believe it's a Weisach tree that was this in the fall, and they turn have the yellow flowers that fall. And it's really pretty. Suzanne really does a nice job. When people do a tour with us, we take pictures and they get a little digital photo album of their tour. This is a picture down in the King William Historic District. This was a neighborhood, first historic district in the state of Texas, and it's a neighborhood that was settled by Germans starting from the 1850s through around 1900. At one time, about 30% of the population of San Antonio was German, and German became actually one of the primary languages of the city.
Okay.
There's always kinds of events going on. This is during Fiesta, which is 11 days of sort of like Mardi Gras season, and they have street fair set up near the Alamo Dome. We actually were cruising around the Alamo Dome to check it out. We typically take off on vacation during Fiesta because the streets often get kind of crowded. This is in Hemisphere Park, one of the water features that remains from the fair. Of course, the Alamo. This is one of 5 colonial missions that were established between 1718 and 1731. Now, just recently, this street that's in front of the Alamo has been closed to vehicular traffic for a long time. And up until this year, we were able to ride right in front of the Alamo and take a picture on this closed street. But we've had a proliferation of the electric scooters here in town, and the Alamo chose to close that street to any type of vehicle. You have to be a pedestrian to get in there, so we're not able to do that photo op. This is what they don't see.
You having a good time? When I see the Alamo there, it reminds me to ask you about what, and I'm guessing this is it. What's the most popular destination on the tour? Is it the Alamo or? No,
actually, I think statistically our most popular tour is we call our River and Mission tour. It's a 4-hour tour that goes down to Mission San Jose. San Jose is the most restored of the missions. A lot of people that come to San Antonio, they see the Alamo and they think, wow, that's really small. And why'd they put the Alamo downtown? It doesn't look like it did in that John Wayne movie. Those are typical things. But San Jose was reconstructed back in the 1930s. So it has, they rebuilt the walls. The church was reconstructed, and it gives a very good perspective on the mission system in the area. We're a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of the missions.
All right, let's ask a couple questions about the tours themselves. Let's go on back to Steve here, if we could. Let's do this. So. Could you tell us, you mentioned a few of the different tours. Can you give us a rundown then of the different types of tours and ballpark what kind of pricing you were talking about to do those tours?
Sure.
And your seasons. I think you might have seasons as well, right? So
yeah, our seasons are kind of weird. our slowest month is August. We really tour year round. Summers can get pretty warm here. And our joke is that about the only people that want to tour in August are Australians. You know, they'll say, I'd like to tour. I say, it's going to be 104. Not a problem. And so we've done that. We've also toured in January when it's just around freezing. But we have a very temperate climate. Today it's in the 60s, for example, really nice. But we do 2, 4, and 6 hour tours. Basically, the 2 hour tour is an introduction to the city. We also do a little park tour for people that don't want to have a lot of interaction with cars. And then have several different 4 hour tours. That's our most popular type tour. Everything from focusing, again, the central city, we call a historic downtowner. We have a couple of 4 hour tours that go to the missions. And those tours include, every tour includes a trike, a helmet, a radio, a water bottle. 4 hour tours, we take our guest out for a snack. And it might be, depending on which tour we're on, we might go to a fruiteria, which is a really traditional street food here in South Texas and New Mexico. You get a huge cup of fresh fruit, fresh cut fruit with chili powder and lime juice on it, which is it's really pretty tasty. Our 6 hour tours include a lunch, and we'll usually go to maybe a Mexican restaurant. Of course, people say, where do you find a good Mexican restaurant? And basically you stand on any street corner and there's going to be at least one. Also, we go to maybe barbecue restaurant or something like that. Our rates, 2 hour tours are $75 a person. 4 hour tours are $125 a person, and 6 hour tours are $200 a person. And if you bring your own trike, you get a 15% discount. And one other tour we do custom tours. So particularly on the 6 hour tour, I have a World Heritage tour that focuses on all the missions, but I will also do a custom design tour to people's particular interest. We even have a tour we call the Shopping Sherpa Tour. And on that tour, I ride one of my regular trikes and pull a trailer, and we go to the Mercado, which is the largest Mexican market in North America. All kinds of handicraft and things. And there's some couple of classic old stores, Pinners, for example, that sells Guayabera shirts, and Paris Hatters, where you can get your cowboy hat, or even, and I even have a guy that will make a hat. So I've got my logo hat here. You've got one of these.
I've got one of those, Steve. Yeah.
So this is one of my friends. There's a tradition here in South Texas of making hats out of beer cases. And my friend started this business up, and he custom makes hats. He did our logo. We just updated our logo, so he did those for us, and he does sports team hats and all kinds of neat stuff.
Very good. All right. So in my introduction, Steve, I talked about how I have seen, and I'm sure you see plenty of it too, people online talking about where can I tour with my trike? I'm going to Europe. I'm going to go to San Diego. I'm going to go here or there. Where can I rent a trike? You see this all the time. And so for at least San Antonio, you have come up with, I think, an amazing solution. Now, I'm wondering if if there are other people doing what you do in other locations around the country or the world that you're aware of.
As far as doing guided tours like we do, I don't believe there is anyone. I got originally, when I first heard of this, there was a company in New Orleans, Laidback Tours. This is back, 15 years ago. It was a couple that did tours on Pinninger trikes, which are old school trikes, and they got washed away in Katrina. Yeah. And I believe there's a guy up in Virginia that rents trikes along a trail system. and there have been a couple of others, but it's a challenge because it's not just, I get people that reach out to me and say, I had a guy the other day said, have you thought about doing this in other places? And it's just not quite as easy as you would think, because you have to have a combination of, you got to have the infrastructure. You've got to have, I think if you're going to be a guide, and I'm a certified guide. I took a 6-month training course and written exam and oral exam, and have to do continuing education to keep my certification. Obviously, it's not required to do that, but it helps differentiate you in the marketplace. But you've got to have a place that has a story to tell. It can be a challenge.
Yeah, and I see that, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I think, for you to do this someplace else, because you need someone like you, in that particular place. You are not going to open up, Boston trike tours tomorrow. It doesn't make any sense. But maybe there's someone in Boston or someone in Indianapolis or someone in San Diego who might. So on the very narrow question of, would you recommend this to someone who had the time and the interest on their hands in a particular location? Would you recommend doing something like what you're doing? And would you be willing to talk to those people?
Sure. I will consult with it. It can be difficult, particularly in areas, unless you're in a very good temperate climate, where, I'd say Boston. I don't think I'd necessarily want to tour in Boston in February or Chicago in February. Now, in the temperate areas, yeah, in the South probably is reasonable. You also have to decide. There's kind of a couple of models. Where are the people going to come to you and meet you, and then you go out and ride, or are you going to go and meet people? And when I first started, I actually, before I had the velomobile, I had a Greenspeed tandem trike, and I built modified a Bikes at Work 8-foot trailer and built a 5 by 8 foot platform on this trailer. And I would load that up with trikes and go down and meet people at their hotel. And I actually carried I think I carried 7 or 8 trikes on that. I mean, they're stacked up, and I had a little gentleman on the side of the road say, "You're like a bumblebee." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Well, you shouldn't be able to ride with all that stuff on that trailer." But it's better we're fortunate. We're in a location that we have easy access to the central city and to trails. So we just had to relocate our base this weekend because gentrification is coming and we lost our space.
Oh my! All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for sharing the information about San Antonio bike tours. It sounds intriguing. Honestly, I think my wife and I have to maybe take a look at what you're doing in person. So we're going to be in touch here and see if we can't set something up when you have a little time, and maybe we can come and do a little video or something and get a closer look. But thank you for taking the time and sharing all this information about what I think is a great idea. And we are going to put the links, of course, like we always do, in the description below the video here to San Antonio trike tours, bike tours. And Steve, we hope to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Gary. We look forward to seeing you down here, and I hope all our folks that are watching will. If your travel plans bring you to San Antonio, give us a call. We'll be happy to show you the city.
I recommend that they do that. So, all right, Steve, thanks a lot. We will see you again soon. All right, guys. Okay, well, it's time to go to the sports report. Denny, are you about ready to go?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you. Go for it, buddy. You're on.
First thing off, I've been to San Antonio a number of times, and it's a really lovely city. You got a great some of those pictures I recognize from being there, and it's a lovely town. Okay, so the World Ultra Time Trial Championships were held, as in other years, in the desert town of Borrego Springs, California. And the Ultra world, Borrego, as it's known, is the town at the bottom of the famous glass elevator descent from the Sierras on the first day of Race Across America and Race Across the West. The temperature in the summer is usually triple digits, but in early November, it can be a mixed bag. The course is a fairly flat, but the wind can be a real factor. This year's temperature into the high 30s were reported early Saturday morning. The 24-hour racers started 6 p.m. Friday. The 12-hour racers started 6 a.m. Saturday, and the 6-hour racers started at noon on Saturday. All the races finished at the same time. Over the 3 races, there were over 200 entries. This year's race has become the end of the summer Super Bowl of timed ultra cycling races. This year, there were 7 recumbents solo entered in the 3 races, and here are the results. The 24-hour race had 5 entries. Joe Pixley had the highest total mileage in the recumbent category with 352.8 miles and was 38th overall out of 109 solo riders and teams. The other racers challenging the 18-mile course were ultra race vet Rob DeCoe with 320 miles, Bill Spaeth with 284 miles, followed by Bruce Herman and Dan Fallon. The 12-hour race, there was only 1 entry. Jeff Ritter logged a respectable 181 miles. And in the 6-hour race, only had 1 entry as well, but Cliff Federspiel in the 50 to 59 recumbent age group laid down a 2nd place overall finish with 145.2 miles, beating out 43 other entries. And that's very well done, Cliff. I'm sorry, I keep calling you Chris. The Battle of the Brands. Here's a great idea put together by a couple of prominent bent manufacturers to promote the 2-wheeled recumbent bike. The ultra cycling world can only benefit from such events. This is quoted from John Schlitter's webpage with his permission. At the Nashville Recumbent CycleCon, a group of 2-wheeled recumbent industry leaders were standing around talking, kicking around ideas to get more activity in the 2-wheel recumbent market. Talk of promoting a gathering of all recumbent industry in an event to give a show is forced to speak. The first of these events is going to be Sebring 2020, the 100-mile and the 12-hour races. So let's get some folks out to Sebring this year. The idea of the friendly competition is what a group of riders can total the most miles in these events. The deal is you don't have to be a cruise bike, Bashetta, or Schlitter to join in. Just choose what group you want to add your miles to. So run what you brung, but support one of the teams out there. Please join us on your Bashetta, cruise bike, Lightning, Challenge, Zacra, Rand, Schlitter Encore, Schlitter Freestyle, Visions, Valet, M5, Metabike, Performer, whatever you got. Carbent was another one, and all the other brands I'm missing. It's gonna be, let's go have some fun. So it sounds like a great idea. The long waited for something like this to happen. The 2019 ultra race season has come to an end. Except for a few races, participation has been on the decline for most of the races, especially in the recumbent category. Ultra racing isn't for everyone. It requires a large block of time for training and is not a small financial commitment either. However, ultra cycling is a great community. While the goal of each rider is to log as many miles in the time allowed, almost everyone is supportive of the others. I've been in and around it for the last 11 years, and I've had some of the best cycling experiences of my life. So if you think you might have an interest, I urge you to give it a try. There are a number of races across the country, timed races starting at 3 hours and stretching more than 3,000 miles across America. You may be surprised at yourself at what you're able to do. Next month, I'm going to interview recumbent ultra bike racer Sandy Earle, and Facebook, she's known as Red Pearl. We will talk about a couple of her recent races. She has recently scored a couple of recumbent firsts in the ultra world. So that's it for this time. Stay on your bike and keep moving forward. Back to you, Gary.
All right, Denny, thank you. Yeah, we hope those ultra races get a little support, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Battle of the Brands in a minute here. All right, as usual, running kind of late, but I think we're going to get Peter Stull on here. He's got an interesting report he's been working on with an update on his Bent Museum. Peter, are you there? Let's see. Peter, there you go, Peter. Let me go ahead and highlight you. There we are. All right. Are you ready to go? Yes.
I'm ready. Yep.
All right. Go for it.
Well, I've got a slideshow. We've been adding some new bikes, or old bikes, I suppose we should say, to the collection. And the slideshow should run in chronological order.
All right. Yeah, I think I put it in that way.
Okay. I try to title them so they'll do that automatically. There you go.
Go ahead.
This is a Chinook hand trike, which I believe is from the late 80s. It was donated to the museum by A.D. Carson. And there he is donating it. Thank you so much, A.D. So this is an interesting bike. The drive mechanism on it is those two handlebars. You push one forward and pull the other back and then repeat. Back and forth you go. It has the drive system from an Allen-Axe bike, which is how I dated the bike. I'm assuming it was produced when Allen-Axe was in production. So that would be the mid 80s to mid 90s. So I'm picking a date and guessing. We've got it working. The gears aren't shifting yet, but that was not always a real smooth thing with an Allen-Axe. Other than that, it works. I rode around the parking lot. It's kind of neat. And that one is certainly going to earn a spot in the ceiling here very soon at the Bicycle Man. The next one. Oh, there I am. Rode around the parking lot, by golly. It's a pretty neat bike. It looks like a chaise lounge with wheels, which is what we always say a recumbent is like, but this one really is like that. It's pretty neat. I don't think I want to climb a hill with it, but it only has a rear brake. So if you were coming down a hill very fast, you put on that brake, you would slide a long ways.
Next one, please, Trey.
Okay, this is a bike that somebody emailed me and said, I want to sell this bike that belonged to my father, and can you tell me who made it? And I looked at it and I said, gee, I think that's a home-built bike that was inspired by something from Vision. A week later, he sends me a link to the Vision owners group, and there's a picture of all their catalog pages. This is the first model Vision. It's a 2020 Vision R20. It has a mid-drive. And it's in pretty good shape. We haven't got a chain on it on the front, but that's definitely going to earn a place in the ceiling. It's going to replace a early Vision R40 we have for now. When we build an addition here, which probably in the next year we're going to build a warehouse, and then all the bikes that haven't earned a spot in the ceiling of the showroom will be displayed on the ceiling of the warehouse. We're up to 60 bikes or so now. We can only display about 35. This is the one that's coming down off the ceiling. This is the unique thing about this. Everybody's seen an R40, right? The neat thing about this is it doesn't have the horn in the center of the seat, and it doesn't have a pad, which dates it as, I forget, mid-90s or something like that. This is a bike that was donated. It's a, where are my notes here? Quick, get my notes. There we are. This is a 1995 approximately linear Evo Glide. Mark Ahrens donated it, and the Evo Glide was a brand that was manufactured by Linear but designed by Mark and his friends. And so this is a prototype of the above seat steering dual 20-inch Linear. It was actually designed by the Evo Glide guys, and that bike it's gone through several iterations. He gave me 2 frames and then the final bike. And this one, I think, is the second frame, though, in that picture there. So that's gonna be entered into the collection. It's in very nice shape. It has I'm guessing the date because it has a seat that's identical to the seat that was on my 95 Rance Rocket. And that was the first year that seat was made. So it can't be older than that unless they replace the seat. It could be a year or 2 newer. And there it is, the complete bike as we got it. It needs a seat cover, but that's the original seat cover, folks. We're going to leave it on there. And this is a George Reynolds Delta trike. George is known for racing two-wheel bikes. We've got two of his bikes on the ceiling now. This is a one-of-a-kind George Reynolds trike. And if you're familiar with the Reynolds bikes, you'll recognize this as being a Reynolds RT that's been built into a trike. George built it for a customer. It's a one-owner bike. He traded it for an ICE Tadpole. And this bike has two-wheel drive, and it has the characteristic George Reynolds homemade seat with AstroTurf padding. I haven't ridden it yet, but I'm hoping to ride it a bit this summer. It doesn't fit me real well, but I think I'll get a few miles on it. It's in very nice shape. And that is a 99. This is a Penninger Traveler that we got. That would be an early Penninger. And they went out of business around 2005, 2004, something like that. They were they're a pretty unique bike. They have they have two. Let's see this one. Yeah, they have two rear cassettes. You can only see one. The other one drives the left wheel. So there's a crank set, then there's a mid drive, and then there's a shaft goes across to the left, and you can see a sprocket there, and there's a chain that goes back, and there's two 8-speed cassettes on it, which is pretty interesting. I didn't find this seat particularly comfortable, but when I was driving my daughter's Prius home from Los Angeles area over the winter, I stopped and picked this up on the way in Virginia, I believe it was. That was pretty neat. And
I think that's the last slide, Peter.
Okay, well, we also have, I didn't put a picture in yet. We'll get it another time. We have a very early long bike Slipstream that is,
Okay.
you'd have to put it next to Orion Vanguard to tell if it was a Vanguard or not. And there's a story there, but
I might have missed putting that in. I'm sorry.
no, I think I probably didn't send that one. We also just got a Greenspeed GTO, which is for sale used, but some of the older bikes that are for sale used end up getting dusty, and they end up in the collection. So that's kind of fun. We don't have an old Greenspeed right now, so if you've got a Greenspeed that's older or more unique than a GTO, let me know. There'll be a spot in the ceiling for it.
Peter, thanks for coming on again and taking the time to share all this. I know you worked that up pretty good, and I know you had to wait a while to get on there. So I really appreciate it, Peter. We will see you again soon, buddy.
Okay, thanks.
All right, guys. At this point, I want to talk about our sponsors. Let's see here. Are we ready to go? There we go. First of all, it's TerraCycle. From fairings to headrests, whatever accessory you need, Pat and crew have you covered. And trailside.bike. If you find yourself in Florida near the Withlacoochee Trail, stop in and see Andrew and his crew. And Cruise Bike. Their patented race and record-proven front-wheel drive geometry changes the rules of cycling. Now, comfort doesn't have to come at the cost of performance, but fair warning, your cheeks may hurt from smiling. And our special friends at ICE Trikes for sponsoring today's featured guest, Maria Leijerstam. Thanks to Chris and Neil and all the guys at ICE who worked to get Chris on this show. Thanks, guys. All right, to the announcements. Let's pop that first slide up. We had a few videos that we posted since our last show. None more important than this amazing shot of our buddy Trey hugging his new Aero frame. This is the report from Recumbent CycleCon that we attended in October. It's the full comprehensive detail of every vendor that we could get to, and the interviews and the pictures of the bikes close up and all. It was really fun, and it's I think a really good video. So if you want to see what the latest news is in the recumbent world, that's the video to see. All right, and from that, we got a couple of extra videos. We had a couple of seminars. This was an outside one by Chris from Adaptive Adventures, and Dave from Haza also was there talking about adaptive technology and what Adaptive Adventures does, which is amazing. They take care of people with adaptive needs, travel all around the country and even beyond the country a bit. So that's Regain Mobility and Find Adventure. That's on our YouTube channel. And next, we covered the seminar by Rakesh from Falco. He talked about e-assist options, of course, emphasizing his rear wheel motors, but he does go over the other sorts of types of motors that are available. So you might want to take a look at that. So then lastly, we were also in October out to Portland at the Pacific Trike Fest, and our buddy Mel from Recumbent PDX hosted that. It was a really fun time, and we shot lots of nice video there. I think if you want to see people having a good time on trikes and see what goes on in Portland and Recumbent PDX, that's the video for you. It's also on our YouTube channel. So we've been busy. We've been catching up on all the stuff we shot over the last few months. So that's the result. And really, that's pretty much it for the videos. We don't have anything in the can right now. So we'll be out starting early next year, traveling and shooting some more video. All right, now on to viewer submissions. Here's one from our viewer, Don Monk. And he says, Gary, here's a little story I wrote about a good friend of mine, Chip Hanauer. He is one of the winningest unlimited hydroplane drivers of all time, including 11 APBA Gold Cups, 61 race wins, and numerous championships and world records. Inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame in 1965, 4 years before his retirement, Chip was considered by many to be one of the most talented boat racers ever to compete. His amazing racing career came at a cost, however. Surviving several spectacular crashes, they resulted in broken ribs, broken back, and a few concussions, among other injuries. He has managed to continue his favorite activities such as biking and skiing by staying in shape at the local gym. Wow, that's probably not a configuration you want to be in on that boat. But after years of neck and back soreness riding his traditional upright bicycle, I successfully converted him to a recumbent a few months ago, and he has become a huge advocate for the Laidback, feet-up style bikes. Chip's recumbent is a titanium frame Buscetta tie Aero with 650C wheels. It has a few upgraded components along with the stock carbon seat, ADM headrest, and a 23C Continental 4000 tires. He rides frequently on Seattle's Burke-Gillum interurban and Samish River trails, as well as routes on the Olympic Peninsula. We've ridden bikes together for several years now, and I have a carbon Basso and a CA 2.0. And this is Don talking now. He's the one with the carbon Basso and a CA 2.0. I can hardly keep up with him, he says. So thanks a lot, Don, for sending that interesting submission in. And folks, reminder, if you've got pictures or accomplishments or events that you want to share, please send them to us at laidbackbikereport@gmail.com. All right, the next Laidback Bike Bike Report. Denny alluded to the Battle of the Brands, and this is going to be next year in February. And so we're going to talk to Jim and Maria Parker and Mike, Jim and Maria Parker from Cruise Bike, and Mike Wilkerson from Buscetta, and also our buddy Jonathan Garcia will join us. And we are going to talk, first of all, about that Battle of the Brands, and then more widely, we're going to talk about the current status and the future of two-wheel bents. So this is something that we heard a little bit about at CycleCon, and these guys are getting together to try to bring the two-wheel bent bikes more prominently into focus for the market. And so we're going to talk all about that. I think we'll have a nice panel discussion. So with that, we will look for you guys next month. And it's December 8th is the date, by the way. So, all right. Now I want to thank my panelists, guys. Thank you so much for working hard. This was another complicated show. So Denny, thank you for everything that you did. And Trey and Tim, thanks, guys. It was complicated. You did a great job. So thank you. And Brian's not with us today, but always want to thank Brian and Bent Rider for the promotional support.
And don't forget Larry.
And well, Larry Seidman is actually with us.
Larry Seidman, yeah.
And Larry Varney, who
and Larry Varney.
Larry Varney has been on the moderating the chat, as has Larry Seidman. So thanks, Larry and Larry. We appreciate it, guys. So appreciate it a lot. So, guys, really, that's it. I know it was a long show. Thanks for sticking with us. We thank all of you, most of all, for watching this show every month. We sure appreciate it. So until our next webcast, from all of us here at the Laidback Bike Report, so long, Bent Riders.